Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Scotland at 7 with me, Gordon Ross, in the studio. And joining me this evening to help dissect the news is Ken MacDonald from iScot magazine. Welcome back to the programme, Ken.
Good evening.
All right, it's nice to have you with us, Ken. I'm going to launch into our usual rundown on the coronavirus statistics, first of all, before we start into tonight's stories. And as of 2 o'clock today, a total of 612,990 people in Scotland have now been tested through NHS Scotland labs and the UK government's regional testing centres. Of these, 591,942 were confirmed to be negative. 21,048 were positive. There are now 159 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. But there were 0 reported new deaths of people who have tested positive today. This is going to be an underestimate of the number of cases because not everyone with the virus displays the symptoms and not all of those with symptoms will be tested. Of the people who have tested positive, 258 were in hospital last night, 4 of whom were in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have now died from complications caused by the COVID-19 infection now stands at 2,496. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show that 41,544 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 3 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings and not just in hospitals. And now to tonight's main news. But before we do that, I'd just like to remind you that you can join the conversation here if you like on Twitter by following us at BroadcastScot using the hashtag Scotland at 7. Tonight's first main story. The Tories are hardening their Brexit plans and it underlines the need for independence. The SNP has said devastating Tory threats of the hardest of Brexits underlines the need for Scotland to become an independent country after Boris Johnson proposed to impose a no-deal Brexit. Responding to the Prime Minister's claim that crashing out of the European Union with no deal would be a good outcome, and the news of Tory plans to pass legislation overriding the withdrawal treaty, Ian Blackford MP said that independence was now the only way to protect Scotland's place in Europe. The SNP Westminster leader said that the Tory plans showed that Boris Johnson can't be trusted and is threatening Scotland and the UK economy with a catastrophic blow. Well, Ken, what do you think? How catastrophic a blow is this likely to be? We're hearing that Boris Johnson is now saying that a no-deal Brexit is a good outcome. Is it a good outcome?
Well, if you go back to Dublin on the 7th of September last year, Boris Johnson made a speech stating that to end up with a no-deal scenario would be a failure of statecraft. And here we go, just 2 days away from 1 year later, and he's saying that it's a good thing, when previously he said it was a bad thing. So we're getting to the stage whereby we can't keep, skirting around the outside of this absolutely banality that comes from our Prime Minister. The man just doesn't deserve to be in the position he's in, and we need some adult actually in the room that's going to take charge of this and try and make some common sense out of it. Actually, at the minute in time, just seems to be himself and some friends of his that are benefiting out of this chaos. And the majority of people, if not all, aside from the few that friends of Boris, are going to be in real trouble.
Kenneth, many people have said, particularly in social media recently, that this was something that they predicted from the start, that Boris Johnson was never really serious about having any kind of deal with the European Union after Brexit. Do you agree with them?
Yeah, I mean, you need to know the man, and the man himself is just a pure opportunist. He has been sacked from every position that he's been in for lying. He just is a nasty piece of work, to quote a journalistic colleague. He's not particularly pleasant. He's not even embarrassed by the kind of stuff that he does. And the fact that he's protected by the BBC and most of his friends in the media, he's going to get a safe run. I just think that he just can't imagine how easy it is for him to do what he wants whenever he wants without any anybody having to chastise him with. He is a man in his own, and sadly, I think things are going to get a hell of a lot worse. Anything that we've ever seen in our lifetime.
So do you see this, Ken, as the narrowing down of options as we go through, or appear to, watching the British government run down the clock towards a no-deal Brexit and the end of this round of talks? Are we now seeing all of these other options closing off now? Boris Johnson seems to be shutting the door one after the other. Is he, do you think, leading us towards this? And basically this is them just trailing the idea? This is them getting us used to it?
Are we being softened up? But we have been for the past 4 years. I mean, effectively, the narrative that the government are trying to put out through the mainstream media is the fact that we are being picked on somehow by these foreigners in Brussels, and they're trying to dictate terms. And as was said many times during the referendum, is that the United Kingdom was rule makers, not rule takers, and therefore anybody that tries to explain that they need to sit down and discuss is bullying from their side. And Johnson's followers will just lap that up. They particularly love this kind of idea of being picked on and therefore hell mend Europe because they need us more than we need them. Yet we're still waiting on any German car company at the last minute trying to beg Merkel that they should give us the dispensation that the United Kingdom needs. It's a joke. We're in Alice through the Looking Glass territory now.
Okay, well, listen, thank you, Ken. I'd like to move on to our next story, if I may. This also is relating to the Conservative Party, this time Douglas Ross, the new incumbent of the mantle of Tory leader in Scotland. And according to reports today, Douglas Ross has posted missing amid the no-deal threat. The SNP has challenged the absent Scottish Tory leader Douglas Ross to speak out against Boris Johnson's reckless plans for a devastating bad deal or no-deal Brexit. Mr Ross had previously claimed, "I will back the Prime Minister where I think it's right for Scotland, but if I think he's got something wrong or where I think the government has got something wrong, I will stand up and say that." Despite this, Mr Ross has stayed silent, rubber stamping the Prime Minister's disastrous Brexit plans at every Westminster vote. Kirsten Oswald MP said that the Scottish Tory MPs had completely failed to stand up for Scotland and would bear the blame for Boris Johnson's plans for a very bad deal or no deal outcome, which would deal a hammer blow to Scotland. And commenting, Ms Oswald MP said, "Douglas Ross once claimed he would stand up to Boris Johnson, but instead he's been posted missing and has rubber-stamped the Prime Minister's disastrous and extreme Brexit plans at every Westminster vote." Now, I have to say, Ken, are you really surprised at Douglas Ross absenting himself in this way? He seems to have taken a leaf out of Boris Johnson's playbook. In other words, whenever anything bad happens, he's nowhere to be found.
Well, the Tories don't really do blue on blue. Let's face it, it doesn't matter what happens, they stick together. I'm not surprised he's not shown his face because there's no PR opportunity to do so. So he just does what Tory does.
So do you think maybe that Douglas Ross is, as he's being claimed, just Boris Johnson's poodle? He's another sock puppet leader of the Scottish Tory party?
Well, it's self-evident that Boris Johnson dictates who he wants within his party, and if you fall foul of Boris Johnson, you're not going to be anywhere near the cabinet at all. So yeah, he just has yes men with him, and the young lad's trying to obviously state that he is his own man, but he's his own man owned by Boris, so he will just say what he's asked to say.
Well, I mean, I have to say that the Scottish government, well, some people in the Scottish government have said that the Scottish Tories are being described as feeble. And yesterday the news broke that Mr Ross and Ruth Davidson had penned begging letters to potential donors looking for funds in order to fight the next year's general election. Does this point to a Scottish Tory party which has got the backing of Boris Johnson?
Well, it's Baroness, first of all, I think, to give her the correct title. She and her colleague are going to struggle because as the actions of what's happening now and getting closer to the final day of leaving the European Union begin to dawn on folk, they're going to have a tough gig to sell brand Tory. I don't know anybody that has got a good word to say for these guys, and it's not as if it's just damage limitation. It's their income stream that they have to protect, and obviously, the more they can borrow from folk to help them do this on dwindling numbers, the easier it is probably for them to get in front of cameras.
Okay. Let's move on to our next story. Now, it's not just Scotland which is, of course, affected by Brexit, and Ireland is feeling the shock today as it's been rocked by Brexit threats. Politicians across Ireland have reacted with shock, dismay and disappointment at the UK government's threat to abandon the withdrawal agreement, and specifically the special arrangements for Ireland designed to protect the Good Friday Agreement. In Dublin, the Irish government attempted to project a sense of concern rather than panic, while Belfast political parties sounded the alarm over the revived prospect of a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. Simon Coveney, the Irish Foreign Minister, said that media reports that London was planning legislation to override parts of the withdrawal agreement, if confirmed, would damage 11th hour trade talks with the European Union. It would fundamentally undermine trust between the two parties, he told RTE. Coveney said that Dublin didn't know if the threat first posted by the Financial Times was a false report, political gamesmanship or a real prospect. We'll have to wait and see, he said. In Northern Ireland, nationalist parties warned that rowing back on legally binding commitments would undermine the 1998 Good Friday Agreement and destabilise the region. The impact will be negative, and the only safeguards that we have to mitigate the damage is the protocol, said Michelle O'Neill, the Deputy First Minister and Sinn Féin's Deputy Leader. This would be a betrayal of what has already been agreed and would inflict irreversible harm on our economy and the Good Friday Agreement. The Democratic Unionist Party, which opposed special arrangements for Northern Ireland, made no immediate official response. But on Friday, its leader, Arlene Foster, said that she recognised the protocol was law and that the challenge was to mitigate its impact, only to have the rug pulled out from under her by Downing Street's announcement. Sammy Wilson, the DUP's Brexit spokesperson, said the party would not accept the withdrawal agreement, a flat contradiction of his leader that was not issued through the party's press office. O'Neill said that Sinn Féin would seek to rally support in Northern Ireland's Stormont Assembly, as well as Dublin, Brussels and Washington, to defend the foundation stones of the peace process. Colm Eastwood, the leader of the Social Democratic and Labour Party, said it was astonishing and reckless that the British government would shred its own credibility and undermine the Good Friday Agreement. So there's a great deal, Ken, of astonishment in Ireland at the actions of Boris Johnson and this threat to the Good Friday Agreement. Now, assuming for a second that Boris Johnson is not bluffing and using the lives and livelihoods of the Irish people, both north and south, as a bargaining chip, if he's serious about this and goes ahead with it, what would the effect be on both the north and the south? Would there have to be a new customs border erected if this was the case?
I honestly don't know, because the ramifications would be serious. I mean, this is an international treaty brokered over a long time by a variety of parties, all in good faith. And given that the Prime Minister is now threatening, albeit through a third party, to look at revising or revoking, is something I find quite unbelievable. But then again, knowing the Prime Minister for who he is, what he is, the history of the guy, his DNA, this could be just politicking for the purpose of trying to gain something. I've yet to understand what. But I just don't understand how the guy can go ahead and even mention this kind of stuff when he knows fine well that this would make him very, very unpopular, even worse than he is at this moment in time within the world community.
So would you characterise this, Ken, as perhaps the British government playing a really big bluff against the European Union and perhaps trying to provoke the Europeans into ending the talks early, rather than the British government taking the blame, which probably it should be doing, but trying to blame the foreigners by basically making it so difficult for them to agree to anything that they simply can't negotiate anymore?
Yeah, they're just not honest brokers. I mean, the point being that the UK government had put forward a proposal in good faith and then negotiated against it, trying to make it out as if it was the European Union that were being difficult. There is no trust that I have in this United Kingdom government to say anything in an honest way. They really are a rogue state trying to chance their arm to get whatever they can get, and they're prepared to pull a pin and a grenade just to lob it into the conversation is something that they would do quite simply because they just are these kind of guys.
Well, it's certainly the case that when it comes to negotiating with the European Union, even as members, the British government was known for playing these sorts of tricks and literally taking it all the way up to the 11th hour before doing a deal. Do you think this is just gamesmanship, or is there anything more to it than that?
No, it's power. It's just purely simply power. They believe that they have the ability to change the narrative and the direction of policy by threatening people. I mean, any organisation, any government who's generally has good faith in negotiating with other countries does so from, obviously they want to gain an advantage in what they're doing, but it's negotiation. This is not negotiation from Boris. This is ultimatums and confrontation, and you never win an argument by either confrontation or bullying or intimidation, and certainly not by calling the people you're trying to negotiate with as liars or bullies.
Okay, Ken, thank you for that. We're going to move on to our next story, but we've just had a press release come in from the Scottish Government, in fact, and this is an update on coronavirus restrictions which are in place in the west of Scotland. Now, restrictions on meetings on indoor household settings are to be extended to people living in Renfrewshire and East Dunbartonshire. The current limits on indoor gatherings for people living in Glasgow, East Renfrewshire and West Dunbartonshire will also continue for another 7 days. The restrictions follow a recent increase in the number of coronavirus COVID-19 cases, with 78 new cases reported today in the Greater Glasgow and Clyde area and 92 cases on Sunday. So people living in Glasgow, East Renfrewshire, West Dunbartonshire, Renfrewshire and East Dunbartonshire local authority areas should not meet with people from other households in indoor household settings. They should also not meet people in indoor household settings in other local authority areas. Members of different households can, of course, meet up, but the restrictions, I'll have to go through this with you to make sure that we read the right part of this. They can, of course, continue to meet outdoors with other households, including in gardens and hospitality settings, provided that all guidance is followed. Now, there is a lot more to this press release, which we don't have time to go into, but this is obviously an escalating situation with COVID-19. And Ken, while you're still on the line here, we do seem to be seeing a gradual increase in the number of COVID-19 cases in the west of Scotland, and the existing lockdown, which was imposed a few days ago, doesn't really seem to be controlling it. So obviously the government is trying to target these other areas. How confident are you, do you think, that we'll be able to control outbreaks like this, given the new track and trace system that we have? Are we able to lock this down again and get it back under control?
Only with the cooperation of the citizens of Scotland. I had a procedure a couple of weeks ago and had to go for a COVID test 3 days beforehand. And speaking to the senior nurse there, she mentioned that between Paisley and Balloch, they had no reported cases in quite a while. Quite a few people come through for tests, but they were all proving to be negative, and she hoped that was important for their area, but it depends on the discipline of the individuals in other areas to knuckle down and understand how dangerous this virus actually is. Having said that, we're hearing reports from people who have been out and about for a variety of reasons, telling us that they're seeing many people disregarding the rules and regulations that the Scottish Government are recommending. Again, the word being recommending here, they're not forcing people to do it, but they're suggesting that they need to understand the importance of, distancing and washing your hands, etc., and wearing a mask. And a lot of people are just flouting these rules, thinking it won't happen to me. I've been through this for 3 months or 4 months. Nothing's happened. I don't know anybody who's got it and died. Why should I bother? And then sadly, these are the people who are probably causing all these
Okay,
additional
listen, thank you,
infections.
Ken.
Plus
We're
the
going to
fact
move
that
on to our next scheduled story now, and that is Tory MPs accused of mudslinging and claimed that it will backfire on them. The SNP has said a Tory MP should apologise for an ill-judged tweet claiming that the Labour Party are doing badly in Scotland because of Richard Leonard's accent. The Tory MP for Bishop Auckland, Dehenna Davidson, tweeted, "Watching Sophie Ridge and Skye, she's discussing why the Labour Party isn't doing well in Scotland. I think I've got to the bottom of it. The Scottish Labour leader has a broad Lancashire accent." Face palm emoji. Now, Richard Leonard is actually from Yorkshire, where Dehenna Davidson comes from, and her tweet produced a deluge of widespread ridicule. And commenting, Hannah Bardell MP said, "The Tory MP Dehenna Davidson should apologise for this ill-judged tweet, which says far more about backwards Tory attitudes than it does about Scotland, which is a welcoming country. Place of birth appears to be an obsession for the Tories with their hostile migration policies. But Scotland has been built on people of all backgrounds making our country their home, and it's all the better for it." So, Ken, what do you make of this story? Dehelina basically putting her foot in her own mouth by the sound of it, and coming from Lancashire herself, doesn't even appear to have recognised that Mr. Leonard comes from Yorkshire. A bit of a gaffe, surely.
If anything, it just shows that education is not a bar to becoming an MP.
Well, it just goes to show you when you're slinging mud, you have to make sure that what you're saying is actually true, first of all. But what do you think? The Tories do seem to have an absolute obsession with where people are born, where they come from, and somehow or other where you're born determines whether or not you should be able to vote in a particular place. Is that really all that important, where somebody comes from?
No, I don't even know why she brought it up. I mean, there seems to be a kind of narrative we're seeing in social media that any criticism of the government automatically brings about a red card of anti-Englishness. A bit like anti-Semitism is a lot of times is brought out for shutting down conversation when there's a difference between out-and-out anti-Semitism and constructive criticism of certain things. But this anti-Englishness is just worst. It's nasty, it's horrible. They forget that most people in Scotland have got relatives who are English, who don't necessarily live on the opposite side of the border, but it's just silly and stupid. And no, I'd rather not give it the oxygen of feel it with trying to comment this kind of stuff. It's daft. It really is silly. And
yeah, it's obviously a blatant attempt to accuse
it's just
anybody who criticises Richard Leonard of being a racist.
No, he's just not a very good politician, but that could be anybody. That's not anti-Englishness, that's just a statement of fact. And the thing that backs it up is the fact he's so low in the polls. And apart from the fact that his own MPs don't want him in there, so is that anti-English?
Okay, thank you, Ken. Okay, we're going to move on now, and to a more serious topic now. Alexei Navalny has regained consciousness. The Kremlin critic, Alexei Navalny, has emerged from his medically induced coma and is responding to speech, according to the Berlin hospital where he's being treated. The hospital, which has been treating Navalny since he was airlifted to Germany after falling ill on a Russian domestic flight last month, said his condition had improved and he is being weaned off mechanical ventilation. It remains too early to gauge the potential long-term effects of his severe poisoning, the hospital said in a statement. Navalny, a prominent critic of Vladimir Putin, was taken to Germany last month after collapsing on a flight to Tomsk in Siberia. In Tomsk in Siberia to Moscow, I beg your pardon. The plane made an emergency landing in the city of Omsk so that Navalny could be stretchered off. German Chancellor Angela Merkel said that her government was determined that Navalny was poisoned with Novichok, the same substance the UK alleges was used in the attempted murder of Sergei Skripal in Salisbury 2 years ago. Ken, we on this programme have talked about this poisoning case before, and some people question whether he was poisoned by Moscow, whether he was poisoned by somebody else. But the German government and the German medics, certainly the German medics, would have no reason to lie about something like this. They're very clear, it says in the report, that they've identified a Novichok-style agent, nerve agent, and there are a family of these apparently, that has been used to poison this man's tea. The question really is, as I've said this a few times to guests in the same chair you're sitting in now, what is the point of Russia poisoning somebody like Mr. Navalny? Surely they're just making him even more of a public figure and more of a martyr to the cause.
Well, I mean, you're assuming that Russia was involved. We don't know because we have no facts on that. He can assert that it was, but all we know is that there's a chemical in him like Novichok, which was found in his bloodstream. So that's the only factual information we have. And the guy was poorly. Whether he received poisoning at the airport or whether it was on the aircraft itself, we still don't know. But certainly, scent marking of enemies is things that can be done, which are meant to be done in public, in order to let people know that things happen to those that displease certain people in power. It's not uncommon; it happens quite a lot around the planet, and it just so happens that in this case they think it may well be Russia. I have no reason to suspect it isn't. I have no reason to suspect that it is, but certainly the only reason it would be done is to let people know what happens, and a bit like what they used to do in the 1500s and 1400s by sticking arms and legs on a pole and post to the four countries. Be careful what you do and who you're talking to, you know.
So basically, this is this is Moscow saying that it doesn't matter where you go, we can always reach you, and they're going to use a weapon, which is really a terror weapon, isn't it? Again, this kind of poisoning. They could just shoot him, but poisoning the man in this way is a far more painful and long, drawn-out process, which obviously is a far more of a horror to anybody who might be thinking about speaking out.
Well, it keeps the event in the public eye for a long time. I mean, this guy's going to be poorly for quite a while, and he'll be reported on for quite a while. So certainly, if you want to send out a message, you can bump anybody off anywhere in the back street and throw them into a meat grinder or whatever, that nobody needs to know. I mean, why not do that if they wanted to do it? But the thing, because it's so public, in public areas, if you remember the case of the gentleman that was kissed apparently by a young lady in an airport in Saudi Arabia or someplace, was again public to ensure that people got the message, and it was broadcast through the.
Okay. Well, listen, still on a similar subject, if you like, and that is the treatment of dissidents. And the next story, masked men apparently have seized the Belarusian opposition leader today. The Belarusian opposition leader, Maria Kolesnikova, beg your pardon, was seized by masked men in central Minsk this morning and driven off in a van, according to reports on Belarusian news agency TUTBY. Kolesnikova, a member of the Opposition Coordination Council, is the last of 3 female politicians left inside Belarus who joined forces before August the 9th presidential election to try to challenge veteran incumbent Alexander Lukashenko. As a vocal critic of Lukashenko, she has played an important role in weeks of mass demonstrations and strikes by protesters who accuse Lukashenko of rigging his re-election. He denies that allegation and has accused foreign powers of trying to topple him in a revolution. 3 European Union diplomats told reporters that the EU is preparing to impose an economic sanctions on 31 senior Belarus officials, including the Interior Minister, later this month, in response to the election and the subsequent crackdown. Meanwhile, human rights group Spring has said that it has identified more than 500 cases of police torture across Belarus since the disputed election, including several allegations of actual and threatened sexual assault using police truncheons. So, Ken, here we are again. Another totalitarian regime linked to Moscow and supported by Mr. Putin is putting its foot down. It's trying to stamp out all kinds of dissent and disapproval of Lukashenko. He's trying to basically crush it out, it would seem.
Yeah, it's power. If you want to know who controls you, just see who you're not allowed to criticise, as the saying goes, and that's exactly the same thing. Again, referring to the earlier comments we had in the last subject, it was a public kidnapping. You think if they were going to be discreet about it, they'd make sure that nobody was there to see this thing happening, but it was public. And again, it just alerts me to the fact that it probably is just a warning to those who choose to dissent against the government of the day, that they will be in trouble, and there will be consequences for them.
Do you think that Mr. Lukashenko has actually succeeded in repressing this uprising? Or do you think there'll be other people coming along to fill the places of those who have been either disappeared or chased into exile? Will there be other leaders, do you think? Is anybody going to be brave enough to make a stand after this?
Good question. I mean, there are those brave souls who do decide to make a stand, regardless of the consequences, and one never knows. I mean, it just takes a tipping point to actually change the balance from the bad guys to the, inverted commas, the good guys. But people need to stand up and be accountable and start speaking out against this thing. And certainly on social media, I mean, you don't have to put yourself in front of a gun barrel, but certainly you need to be aware of what's happening and why journalism should be, real journalism should be protected and helped the best it can. So I certainly hope that this individual doesn't come to any harm, and I hope that things decide to calm down there and they can actually negotiate and discuss their way out. I have my doubts, in actual fact, if the leader of the country actually wants that to happen, or just wants people to do as they're told and get on with it, or as we say here, eat their cereal and shut up.
Okay, listen, thank you, Ken. We're going to move on now, and I'm afraid it's more bad news for somebody, but this time in the Khashoggi murder case. The Khashoggi murderers are being sentenced today, I think. The Saudi Arabian court on Monday jailed 8 people for between 7 and 20 years for the 2018 murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, the state media reported. 4 months after his family forgave his killers and enabled the death sentences to be set aside. Khashoggi, a critic of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, was last seen at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul on October the 2nd in 2018, where he had gone to obtain documents for his impending wedding. His body was reportedly dismembered and removed from the building, and his remains have still not been found. The murder caused a global uproar and tarnished the reformist image of Prince Mohammed, the son of King Salman and the kingdom's de facto ruler. State media reported that the 5 people were handed 20-year prison sentences. 1 person was sentenced to 10 years, and 2 people were handed 7-year jail sentences for the killing, and none of the defendants were named. Now, I think this is an interesting development, apart from the fact that Mr. Khashoggi's family very generously, it seems, forgave his killers. But the fact that the killers' names have not been revealed is interesting. What does that tell you, do you think, about the way that the Saudi Arabians are handling the media concerning the Khashoggi case?
Well, it's stated fact that Khashoggi was a thorn in the side of the Saudi Arabia state because of his criticism and for the position that he had to do so. There was a reason, I believe, that the Crown Prince desperately wanted this guy just to shut up or go away, and either his team misinterpreted the guy's comments, or they decided to follow his instructions, but certainly he was nobbled at the embassy and subsequently killed there following his attempt to get a visa. One of the things that happened not long after that event was that our actual timeline on our Twitter feed received a DM from an unknown individual which showed photographs of a dismembered body, and just as quickly as it arrived, it quickly disappeared off our timeline. But it was pretty horrific, and there was no doubt in our mind that this was a gentleman who was being referred to. So we didn't have a time to copy it.
The concealing of the murderers' identities, is that because, do you think that they were perhaps agents of the Saudi government and in fact actually protected in some way?
Well, it was the Saudi embassy he was in, so obviously it was state employees who were involved in the kidnapping and the murder of the individual. So yeah, the state government is complicit in the disappearing of this man.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you, Ken. We're going to move along now and coming back to Scotland for the next story. And a Greenock MSP has called for support for coach firms. Stuart McMillan, MSP, has called on the UK government to provide support to coach firms struggling to get MOTs because of COVID-19 restrictions. Lambs coaches, based in Mr McMillan's constituency, have raised concerns over backlog and difficulties in booking MOTs to ensure that their vehicles are fully compliant with the law. Mr McMillan has written to Transport Secretary Grant Shapps to ask for additional assistance for garages delivering MOTs and a short extension for coach operators to allow them to ensure their vehicles are completely compliant. Now, Mr McMillan, MSP, said that, like so many others, coach firms have faced huge difficulties over COVID-19 and the pandemic, and anything the UK government can do to ease the stress on their operations would be most welcome. Coach firms in my constituency have been struggling to get MOTs because of demand, and this therefore places a challenge on the operators to ensure their coaches are fully up to date and compliant with the rules. Additional assistance to support garages delivering MOTs to deal with the backlog that exists at this time, and a short extension for coach operators to get their coaches fully compliant would help to avoid drivers and operators from being penalised through no fault of their own. Both of these measures would help to assist operators to operate legally and to ensure the safety of buses on our roads. Now, I guess, Ken, this is a fairly straightforward story. Many MOT stations across Scotland and garages of all kinds, in fact, have been closed down during the initial part of the lockdown. But the sheer volume of vehicles which must have been backed up waiting for MOTs must be significant. And I think perhaps they're just struggling, do you think, just struggling to cope with the backlog and try and clear it in time?
Yeah, well, a lot of these people who do MOTs routinely have servicing and a variety of other revenue streams, and many of them have got guys in furlough. So realistically, it's just a case of trying to manage with the available staff that they have. Although, having said that, there's lots of bus hires companies that are lost a lot of business through the fact that people just can't go on bus journeys any longer. So, I mean, is it a fair and reasonable request for what the RHA guys are asking? Yeah, I think it is. I think they have to be sensible that we don't need dangerous buses on the road. I'm sure they're pretty well serviced by their own individuals. But yeah, I think it's a fair and reasonable request.
I think it would be fair, Ken, to say that bus operators are a special case because thinking about it just from the numbers and the safety aspect of this, I mean, a car typically might have one or two people in it, but a bus driver is responsible, for up to 70 or 80 people at a time, maybe more if it's a double-decker bus. And surely they really have to be sure that their buses are compliant with the law or face the consequences if there were an accident.
Yeah, but in fairness, I mean, most reputable bus companies actually do check their buses as routine maintenance on a regular basis. And the MOT is only just the endorsement of the fact that the vehicle is roadworthy at the time they do the inspection. So I know that you can't drive any vehicle if you've not got a valid MOT certificate. So certainly, I mean, we're in difficult times. I think there needs to be some kind of common sense approach to allowing this to be given some kind of waiver, provided perhaps as regular maintenance has been shown by the bus company, or some other reasonable and fair-minded approach to keep the buses on the road when they can.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Ken. Okay, moving on now, and we're talking now about private water supplies and drinking water quality. In 2019, a total of 48,384 tests were taken from regulated private water supplies, which are those supplying more than 50 people or a commercial activity. 89.8% of the tests met the required standard, but then 14.5% of those supplies had a sample contaminated with E. coli, which indicates fecal contamination and potentially causes serious illness. Compliance figures have not improved in recent years, and the 2019 results actually represent a deterioration on the 2018 figures for many types of tests. In 2018, only 11% of samples contained E. coli. Private water supplies are those owned and managed by individuals rather than Scottish Water, and around 3.3% of the Scottish population receive their water from them. The supplies range from those serving a single house to much larger numbers of houses, as well as hotels, tourist accommodation and other businesses. Many of the very small types of supplies have little or no treatment. Where the water from these supplies does not meet the standards, there may be a risk to the health of those drinking them. And according to the latest report from Scotland's Drinking Water Quality Regulator, a significant number do not meet the required water standards and almost certainly represent a risk to health. I have to say, Ken, when I read this report, I was actually quite surprised because it's widely believed, probably wrongly now, looking at these figures, that water which comes from springs or from beneath the ground is somehow clearer and cleaner than water which is collected in reservoirs and then has to be filtered. Do you think maybe we've just been assuming that somehow or other passing through the rocks beneath our feet, the water is clean, and yet, according to the scientists, it seems that that's not the case, and it's getting worse?
No, it's really pretty simple. Is that if you have a contained loop of water coming from a local authority source where it's treated and then dispensed through the artery of pipework that we have, it's highly unlikely that you're going to get any kind of, excuse the word, shit in it that's going to cause what you're finding in these tests. Whereas in the smaller approach, when it's an open source, where anybody can get in any time and contaminate it, that's the problem you've got. It's just a risk as opposed to a secure supply. So yeah, the water is probably pretty pure, but I mean, you could get stuff put into upstream, you could get a dead sheep in it, for sake of argument. You could have anything. You can't guarantee it, but you have to have the filtration processes before it gets to the consumer. And that's quite difficult to manage. Not difficult to do, but quite difficult to manage that these people are actually putting such a barrier in place before it gets to the tap.
Well, one of the things that dawned on me when I read this report, Ken, is there was a report, I think it was last year or the year before, that I can't remember which company it was, but one of the spring water companies operating in the Highlands had drilled several boreholes and were extracting water from the water table beneath the factory. And it apparently caused a loch, which was further up in the mountains, to start draining away. And it was almost as if as they emptied the water from the water table, the water from the loch was basically disappearing as if down a plug hole. This surely, the fact that there are bottled water companies operating in the Highlands, how secure do you think they're, and how safe are their water supplies if they're simply pumping it up from below the ground?
Well, they do check. I mean, it's not just taken straight out of the tap and into a bottle without any due care and consideration. The stuff is actually checked and tested and validated before they decide to bottle and pack and ship. So there's a quality control process in there that makes sure that the water you're getting isn't going to kill you.
Well,
so I think we can.
I find you very reassuring, Ken.
We are a nation.
Thanks for that. Okay, and we're coming up to one of our last stories this evening, and that is about opportunities for minority ethnic people. A new development programme will aim to remove barriers that can be faced by minority ethnic people moving into leadership positions in society. Up to 50 people will benefit from a 9-month professional and personal development programme backed by mentoring and living wage placements across the public and third and private sectors. The programme will focus on young people and will be delivered by the John Smith Centre, backed up by £470,000 of Scottish Government funding. The programme will focus on the developing the professional and personal skills of participants, including negotiating and communication. Now, this is an interesting one, Ken. I have to say I was unaware of this programme, but I can understand the need for it. What kind of positions do you think that this particular programme is thinking about? They're obviously aiming this at young people who may be planning to take up senior roles in some way or another. Why exactly do you think they need to do this? Is there something lacking, do you think, in the education system at the moment for people who are going to be taking up these senior roles? There must have been some kind of survey done to establish that there was a need for this.
I'm not entirely certain the purpose of the expenditure on this, specifically to the proposed people who are going to be employed. I would gather that it's really management and HR that need to understand the reasons behind why minorities don't get a fair share of access up the company ladder. People should understand that everybody is equal in their ability through their ability to demonstrate that they can do the job and do the job well. And being better at the job or showing better prospects doesn't matter the colour of your skin or ethnicity or anything. If you're good to do the job, you should do the job. So teaching young kids that they need to learn how to do something shouldn't be directed at them. It should be directed at HR and management of organisations to understand that there are many people who have wonderful skill sets given the chance, and to take off this pink glasses that blind them to only choosing certain individuals to do a job.
Yeah, thanks. In recent years, the phrase, what was it they called it now? There's a phrase that was invented some time ago to describe people who are put into positions of power, but then feel that they don't deserve to be there. I can't remember the exact term. Maybe you can help me out. But the idea of feeling like they're somehow, it was imposterism, I think it was something like that. Feeling like they shouldn't be there. Do you think there is an issue maybe in some parts of the minority ethnic community that somewhere in the back of their minds they feel that they don't deserve to be there? Is it a question of confidence, do you think, that's needing to be instilled in people that they are worth the same as everyone else?
Well, we are. We're all the same. We're all Jock Tamson's bairns.
Yeah, indeed.
It's just the whole concept of how businesses were run before. You can find that. Let's look at our own United Kingdom government. These are all pals of pals. This has nothing to do with where you came from or your background. The connection there and the common thread is people who will be yes men to Boris Johnson. Yeah. So it doesn't matter what skill you've got, provided you say yes, you've got the job. On the other hand, talking about minorities, minorities may be minorities within the United Kingdom, but certainly if they were coming from any other planet, they would be the mainstream. And therefore, it's all about skills and ability. If you have the skill and you have the ability to do the job, that should be it. There should be no other criteria applied. And we shouldn't actually overcomplicate it by singling out certain minorities specifically for funding for this, when the problem isn't coming from them. It's coming from management and HR, in my opinion.
I was going to say, I'm guessing from reading this item that they're saying that up to 50 people will benefit from this professional and personal development. Somebody must be selecting them, Ken, you would imagine. I'm not sure whether it's the government or whether it's the public sector, the private sector, third sector. But somebody must be selecting these young people, you would imagine, for this specific training.
Box ticking is not a thing that I'm too happy about. I just don't agree with creating scenarios for the purpose of creating scenarios. Everybody is equal. Nobody's better than anybody else. If you're looking for a specific skill set, if that individual has it, can demonstrate it, that's it, my view. They get put into their hats in the ring for contention with everybody else. Specifically trying to tick boxes by saying you should have a certain category of individuals in a team is not, in my view, the best way of doing it. You need to look and see what the actual problem is, but you don't achieve anything by just ticking boxes and having token individuals on a board because it ticks a box.
So would it be fair to characterise your view on this, that this kind of operation is perhaps, as you say, a tick box exercise? Maybe they're kind of rainbow washing the choice of leaders for tomorrow. Is it just window dressing?
Well, a lot of it's well intentioned, but actually, it's to say that yes, we can't be criticised that we're not doing anything for minorities. But again, if you have individuals that don't have a specific skill set, they're not going to fit into a company. You shouldn't be embarrassed into hiring somebody because they can't do the job because they happen to tick a box, or you get grant aid for employing what they call a minority. It just doesn't make sense to me. You have to address the problem, or the sign problem, differently, and certainly awarding money to the individuals who feel as if they're going to struggle to find a position isn't going to help them because they still have to confront the people who are, maybe need training or the HR and the management of the companies that could do with employees, but for some reason or other prefer to choose, I don't know, whatever criteria they use to apply to hire people.
I noticed also, just before we leave this topic tonight, that it's being delivered by the John Smith Centre, and I'm assuming that it's named after the former Labour leader John Smith, and it is obviously some kind of social enterprise of some kind. Is it significant, do you think, that it's coming from that particular political, if you like, side of Scottish politics? Is there, do you think, a political motive behind announcing this funding? Is it actually a political decision? Are they trying to look more accepting, do you think?
God, I've absolutely no idea. Certainly, if you have a business and you want that business to succeed, the biggest asset that you have is your staff. And the best thing you can do is to hire people smarter than yourself. Yeah. Because obviously it's an investment and it helps you achieve what you want to achieve. Colour, creed doesn't come into it at all. It doesn't really matter at all. And particularly nowadays when a lot of businesses are realising that COVID-19 is going to change the paradigm of business. What does it matter when everybody can work from home using a phone? What colour they are, or provided they can do the job, they qualify for being considered for employment. To highlight specific minorities and giving money to 50 minority individuals how do they spend that money? How's that money being spent? What is it for? Is it allocated against training? For what? If you come up against an individual in HR who's not particularly keen in hiring minorities, it isn't going to change anything. We need to change management mindset, we need to change companies' mindset, and we need to let people know that everybody is equal in this country, and you shouldn't have to fight or argue against your colour, creed, or religion. I feel quite strongly about this.
All right, listen, thanks very much, Ken, for all of that. Now, just before we close out the show this evening, we've just had another press release just come out, actually, from the SNP. And this is to announce that the SNP MSP Maureen Watt is to stand down from Holyrood in 2021. MSP Maureen Watt has announced that she will not be seeking re-election in next year's Scottish Parliament election. The Aberdeen South and North Kincardine MSP informed her constituency association of her decision last night. And she commented on her decision saying, "I love my job, and since the spring of 2006, it has been a huge privilege and a joy to represent the people of North East Scotland and subsequently those in the constituency of Aberdeen South and North Kincardine." But she goes on to say, "However, after months of deliberation and 15 years as an MSP, I've decided not to seek re-election next year. If re-elected, I would be nearly 75 by the end of the next term, and the time is right now for another woman to represent our wonderful part of the country on behalf of the SNP at Holyrood." Now, this is obviously, Ken, part of a wider trend of older members of the Scottish National Party who are currently MSPs deciding to hang up their MSP clothes. I don't know what they wear, but basically to retire from politics actively and let somebody younger in the door. Do you think this is going to usher in a whole new generation of SNP MSPs at the next general election?
I honestly don't know. One thing I would say is this is the 12th or 13th SNP individuals leaving in their 60s and 70s. That's not old. I know you said it was old. They may be senior citizens, but it's not old, considering within the next couple of years, if we're still
I think there's still, Ken, I know this is an old-fashioned view, but I can remember my grandfather saying to me that people retired at 65 to make room for youngsters at the bottom to come into the workplace. Is that still a thing? Do you think people still think that way?
don't have a handle on that, but I mean, it didn't make sense saying that you were giving your job to a young person, because if you were of that age, you actually had certain skill sets that took many years to actually acquire. I mean, I remember John Brown Shipyards, there was loads of guys working on lathes who were super talented individuals. But once they invented CNC machines, you suddenly found that these guys were off hire, and regardless of 40 years of experience. Things change. We don't have cabbies that drive horse-drawn carriages anymore. We don't have people farriers that do horses.
True.
Things move on, things change. We have coders now that code software that didn't exist when I was born. Things are constantly at a state of flux. The only constant is change. But one thing is that 65 isn't old, 75 is not old at all, given that your pension age is supposed to start at 70, coming up in a couple of years' time. So I just suspect there's something not quite right about all these people suddenly resigning almost en masse, and it may well be nothing, or it may well be symptomatic of the current state of play of the SNP party, where I suspect, and again only my opinion, that some of them are saying, we've been here, we've had 7 mandates, what's the bloody point of trying to do this anymore? We're not getting any further. I don't want to, pop my clogs in 10 years' time. If we're so close to achieving it, why not stay on and see it through? It just doesn't ring true to me, and maybe it may just be me, but something doesn't ring true in this.
So I'm intrigued by your answer there. So on one hand, you're saying that maybe it's because of conflict within the SNP parliamentary party, and maybe it's about maybe they should stay on and just see it through. And I can understand you saying you would want to stay on and see it through, but it seems that many people don't want to do that. And as you said, they're using age as a reason, but you suspect that may not be the real reason?
Well, if you think about the last independence referendum, the reason why it didn't go over the line, there was only about 300k votes difference. It came from the 55 plus age group, who were quite keen on sticking with the status quo within the United Kingdom. So if people at 80, 85, 90, 95, even 100 can vote, they have an opinion, they have a worth. Being in the SN or any political party shouldn't be particularly physically taxing. I know it's a lot of hours at work, but it's, it shouldn't be, if we're so close to getting the prize, be something that would put you off staying on there and contributing to the fact you've actually got to the stage where you are. So I just don't quite understand it, and I'd love to hear why they are. My own personal opinion is some of them are just, I think, scunnered with what's going on within internally in the party and just have given up because of it. But I still think they'll be quite active behind the scenes.
Okay. Well, listen,
Ken, again, I have no insight. It's just my own personal opinion.
Okay. Well, listen. Thank you very much for all of your comments this evening, Ken. We've actually just come to the end of our allotted time this evening. Of course, there's only just time for me to ask you if you'd like to become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. If you would, and you'd like to help us make more programmes and help us to fund better and longer programmes as well, you can do that by following the instructions on your screen now. But as far as this issue of Broadcasting Scotland at 7 show is concerned, we are now over and done with. I'd just like to thank my guest Ken MacDonald, for stepping in, and I'll see you again hopefully this coming Thursday. That's it from us tonight. A very good evening to you.